At 88, Bill Anderson can still step into the wooden circle of the Grand Ole Opry and make a crowded room fall silent for a whisper. His songs gave America words for devotion, regret, loneliness, and the pain of letting go. But away from the stage, life handed him losses no lyric could repair. The accident that permanently changed Becky's health, Bet's death from cancer, and the final days of Vicky Salas, the woman he called my everything. The applause continued, so did the empty chairs. If Bill Anderson's music ever carried you through a loss of your own, honor his journey with a like, because this is not simply the story of a man who survived fame and grief. It is the story of a voice that kept singing after the people who knew the man behind it could no longer answer. A small radio carried distant voices into the Anderson family home, turning ordinary evenings into brief passages toward places a young boy had never seen. James William Anderson III was born on November 1, 1937, in Columbia, South Carolina, and moved with his family to Georgia while still young. His childhood was stable and largely unremarkable in the best sense of the word. There was food on the table, work to be done, school to attend, and a father whose involvement in the insurance business represented a practical world built on schedules, responsibility, and careful preparation. Nothing in those rooms announced that one of country music's most enduring writers was growing up there. Bill was simply a watchful child, learning the rhythms of adult conversation and listening closely when country songs came through the radio. Those voices seemed to understand that ordinary lives could carry enormous feelings. They sang about places that sounded far away, people who waited too long, and promises that did not always survive. Long before Bill knew how a professional songwriter worked, he understood that a few well-chosen words could make a stranger's life feel familiar. The first guitar did not welcome him gently. Its neck was thick, the strings sat high, and pressing them down left his fingertips sore. He studied instruction books, accepted guidance from a neighbor, and kept returning to the instrument even when the sound coming from it was rougher than the music he heard in his head. His young hands had to learn patience before they learned fluency. A chord required pressure. A clean note required repetition. Years later, those same hands would rest against microphones, hold award plaques, and turn pages filled with lyrics known across America. At the beginning, they were simply small hands trying to make stubborn strings obey. Bill began experimenting with rhyme at an early age, discovering that words could be arranged almost like players on a field. Some belonged together. Others created tension when placed side by side. He did not yet possess the life experience that would fill his later songs, but he already had the instinct to notice how language sounded when spoken aloud. At Avondale High School, 3 possible futures began forming around him. Baseball taught him timing, discipline, and the loneliness of standing in position while waiting for a ball that might never come. Sports writing taught him to observe what mattered, the inning that changed a game, the player who hesitated, the detail that explained more than the final score. Music gave those observations a pulse. Bill played baseball, wrote sports stories, and formed a band with classmates, moving between the field, the page, and the guitar without knowing which one would claim him. At the University of Georgia, he studied journalism and moved closer to radio, where words had to be clear, immediate, and alive the moment they left the mouth. A baseball, a newspaper, and a guitar could have sat beside one another in his room, each representing a life still available to him. He might have spent his years covering games, speaking into a local microphone, or measuring time by seasons rather than songs. For a while, every path remained open. Then work carried him to Commerce, Georgia, where a small radio station and a modest hotel placed him beneath a night sky. A few distant lights were waiting there, and one evening, they would make the other possible lives begin to fade. The roof was only 3 stories above Commerce, Georgia, yet to 19-year-old Bill Anderson it offered a view large enough to hold a future. In 1957, while working at radio station WJJC and living in a small hotel, he climbed above the rooms and looked out over the town. There was no great skyline below him. Only a few traffic lights burned in the distance, modest points of color against the dark. Bill had spent years hearing songs turn ordinary places into emotional landscapes, and now his imagination did the same. The town beneath him became larger in language than it was in geography. A guitar rested in his hands. The lights below suggested movement, longing, and people drawn toward brightness while leaving other people behind. From that narrow rooftop came city lights, written by a student who had no guarantee that anyone beyond Georgia would ever hear it. The song did not arrive in Nashville with the force of a major campaign. It traveled outward through a recording, passed from one set of hands to another, carrying Bill's name into rooms he had never entered. The young writer had no powerful organization surrounding him, only a song strong enough to keep moving after he released it. Ray Price eventually recorded City Lights, and in 1958, his version rose to the top of Billboard's country chart. Bill's words were suddenly reaching listeners across America, sung in kitchens, automobiles, dance halls, and houses where the songwriter himself remained unknown. The lights he had observed from a small-town roof now belonged to millions of private memories. Success brought a recording agreement with Decca and pulled Bill steadily toward Nashville, yet he completed his university education before surrendering fully to the new life. Journalism had trained him to respect facts, deadlines, and the weight of a precise sentence. Those lessons followed him into songwriting, where a single object or place name could reveal an entire emotional world. Bet Rhodes entered this period while the future still carried risk. Bill was gaining attention, but a successful song did not promise a permanent career, and Nashville had seen many young writers arrive with one good record and disappear soon afterward. Bill and Bet married in December 1959, beginning their life together as his schedule became less predictable. He was still close enough to his old world to remember the routines of school and local radio, yet the road was already pulling him outward. In 1961, he became a member of the Grand Ole Opry. The stage that had once seemed distant now welcomed him as one of its own, and its lights replaced the traffic signals of commerce with a brightness that could be seen far beyond Tennessee. The applause carried opportunity, responsibility, and another promise that would require him to leave home. By the time Still emerged, Bill no longer looked like a young man who had simply been fortunate once. He was becoming a durable voice in country music. At home, a marriage certificate could sit beside travel plans and performance dates, one document marking a promise to remain close, the others measuring how often work would take him away. Each open door revealed another behind it. Bill kept walking forward, and the ordinary life he might have lived grew smaller in the distance. The microphone did not require Bill Anderson to overpower it. He leaned toward it and allowed his voice to settle into a space between singing and speaking, intimate enough to sound as though he were sharing a confidence meant for one listener. Still carried that voice far beyond the traditional boundaries of country music. Its restraint became its strength. Bill did not chase the listener across the room. He made the listener move closer. The style earned him the name Whisperin Bill, a nickname that captured more than volume. It described the trust he created through phrasing, pauses, and the feeling that a private memory had been placed directly into the listener's hands. Between 1960 and 1978, Bill accumulated 37 top 10 country hits. The numbers established his reach, yet the songs explained his endurance. Still lived inside memory that refused to loosen its hold. The tip of my fingers captured the quiet shock of losing what had seemed close enough to touch. Saginaw, Michigan built an entire human world from a place name. Po folks observed dignity within a modest life, without turning its characters into objects of pity. His gifts extended beyond his own voice. Bill recognized something powerful in Connie Smith and helped move her talent toward the people who could open the right doors. He wrote once a day, and her recording transformed longing into a ritual, as though grief had become part of the clock itself. The song's success demonstrated Bill's rare ability to write words that remained unmistakably his, while sounding completely natural in another singer's mouth. Nashville came to value him as both performer and craftsman. Songs moved from his writing room into the lives of other artists, sometimes becoming inseparable from voices different from his own. The work demanded observation, discipline, and humility. A lyric had to leave him and belong to someone else. On the Grand Ole Opry stage, the WSM microphone became familiar beneath his hand. On the road, the scenery changed while the schedule remained relentless. A hotel room, a rehearsal, a sound check, a performance, and another departure could fill a week before the previous one had settled into memory. Television widened his presence. On The Bill Anderson Show, viewers saw a polished host who knew how to guide a program without appearing hurried. The Better Sex and Fandango brought him into homes where some viewers knew his face as well as his songs. Cue cards waited beyond the camera. A studio clock counted down toward airtime. When the signal arrived, Bill was composed, articulate, and ready. The public saw reliability. Producers saw a professional who could be trusted with live timing, guests, and the delicate rhythm of television. Outside the frame, the open spaces between commitments narrowed. Recording sessions met writing appointments. Opry appearances met television commitments. Tour dates occupied the spaces between them. Posters changed, vehicles changed, and audiences grew, while the need to arrive prepared never changed at all. The contradiction became almost invisible because Bill handled it so well. Millions heard him sing with the warmth of a man seated only a few feet away. His career required him to spend much of his life far from his own living room. The more intimate his public voice became, the more movement his work demanded from him. There was always another audience waiting, another artist needing a song, another television clock approaching zero. Grand Ole Opry remained the fixed point, the stage to which he could return, while nearly everything around it accelerated. Bill had reached a level of success the boy in Georgia could scarcely have named. His voice belonged to American memory. His schedule belonged to trains, highways, studios, and departure times. By 1984, the lights had never been brighter. Bill had built a career across songwriting, recording, radio, television, and the Opry. He had learned how to walk onto a stage carrying private fatigue and still give the audience the steady man they expected. Then, a serious incident on the road entered his family's life. The work did not stop. The microphone remained in place. Yet beyond the studio walls, time had begun to move according to hospital corridors, medical appointments, and a kind of waiting no professional discipline could shorten. The wedding photographs captured different chapters of Bill Anderson's life. In the pictures from 1959, he and Bette Rhodes were young enough to face the future before either of them knew how large his career would become. They had two daughters, Terry and Jenny, and watched Bill's name travel from local radio into homes across America. Their marriage ended in 1969. The date belongs to the public record. The private distance that led to it belongs to the people who lived through those years. Through their daughters, Bette continued to share a family history with Bill long after the legal papers were signed. In 1970, he married Becky. By then, the uncertainty of his earliest Nashville years had given way to recording sessions, television studios, Grand Ole Opry appearances, and roads that repeatedly carried him away from home. Bill and Becky had a son, Jamie. Family photographs showed the outward signs of stability. Formal clothes, children gathered near their parents, and Bill wearing the practiced smile audiences recognized. Outside the photographs, daily life was shaped by departures before daylight, luggage waiting near the door, meals rearranged around travel, and a family learning to measure time by when he would return. In 1984, Becky was seriously injured in an automobile collision. Later reports described permanent brain damage. The consequences extended far beyond the moment of impact. Medical consultations, treatment, rehabilitation, and uncertainty entered a household that had spent years organizing itself around rehearsals, broadcasts, and tours. Bill continued walking onto television sets, hearing the countdown, and becoming the composed performer viewers expected. Away from the cameras, time followed a different authority. Physicians and nurses determined the schedule, and Becky's body followed a course that professional discipline could not accelerate. She lived with the effects of the injury every day. The family adapted to one change, then faced another the following morning. The strain accumulated through repeated drives, waiting rooms, medical explanations, and the practical demands of a life altered without warning. A household accustomed to Bill leaving for work now confronted a different kind of absence. Even when everyone returned home, the earlier rhythm of the family did not return with them. In 1986, a jury awarded Bill and Becky $1.2 million in damages. The verdict recognized the scale of the injury and provided resources for care, transportation, and other needs created by the collision. Yet the precision of the figure could not measure everything the family had lost. A courtroom decision resolved the legal dispute. The Andersons continued living with the injury after the file was closed. Over time, recovery became part of daily life rather than a temporary interruption. Bill continued his career, while Becky continued facing the lasting consequences of the collision. Their marriage entered a prolonged separation during the 1990s and formally ended in 1997. No single incident or court document can contain the full ending of a relationship that lasted more than 2 decades. A wedding photograph preserves the promise at the beginning. A divorce record identifies the date when the marriage legally ended. Between them lie years of care, fatigue, loyalty, disappointment, difficult decisions, and private conversations that public records cannot reproduce. Bill had built his career by shaping emotion into songs that moved toward a final chord. Family life offered no comparable resolution. Bet remained connected to him through Terry and Jenny. Becky occupied another lasting chapter through Jamie and the years they had shared. Bill continued appearing before audiences in a pressed suit, responding to the cue on time and keeping his voice measured. Beneath that professional steadiness were changed households, medical history, legal proceedings, and the recognition that endurance does not always restore a family to its earlier shape. Beyond the home, country radio was changing as well. Younger artists filled the promotional walls, and the industry Bill had once understood instinctively began turning toward a generation that had grown up hearing his songs. The telephone on Bill Anderson's writing room desk had not changed. What changed was how often it rang. For years, Nashville had called when it needed a lyric, a melody, a television host, or a familiar voice audiences trusted. By the early 1980s, country radio was turning toward younger performers and newer sounds. Bill's long relationship with MCA Records had ended, and the steady flow of chart records slowed. He continued appearing at the Grand Ole Opry, and his place in country music history was secure, but past success did not guarantee space for a new song on contemporary radio. Bill later described the years from 1982 through 1992 as the lost years of his musical career. He remained active as a performer and television personality, yet his identity as a current songwriter felt increasingly uncertain. Younger artists now occupied the attention once directed toward his records. The guitar was never far away, but confidence no longer came as easily as it had when Nashville seemed eager for every song he wrote. Bill also sought security beyond recording and songwriting. Radio had shaped his earliest professional life, so station ownership appeared to offer a familiar kind of opportunity. The business depended on advertisers, however, and his name alone was not enough to create the revenue required to sustain it. What he understood instinctively about broadcasting did not automatically translate into successful ownership. He later became involved with Po Folks Restaurants, a chain whose name came from one of his best-known songs. The association seemed natural, a familiar title, country imagery, and a public identity built around warmth and ordinary people. Behind the name were franchise agreements, financial obligations, struggling locations, and legal expenses. The venture consumed money Bill had earned through years of recording and touring. On stage, he understood how to hold an audience with a carefully placed phrase or pause. Business offered no comparable instinct. Advertisers, contracts, debt, and expansion followed rules that songwriting had never taught him. He could continue receiving applause at the Opry while confronting losses that had nothing to do with ticket sales or chart positions. The experience did not erase his career, but it exposed the limits of fame. A recognizable name could attract attention without guaranteeing that a station or restaurant would succeed. The opening back into songwriting came through a song Bill had written decades earlier. In 1992, Steve Wariner recorded "The Tips of My Fingers" and turned it into a major country hit. Bill later described its effect in a single sentence: "That knocked down the wall and opened up my mind." A composition born during his first rise had reached a new audience through the voice of a younger artist. The success did more than revive an old copyright. It gave Bill evidence that his understanding of longing, distance, and human regret had not expired with a changing radio format. He remained hesitant around younger writers, publishers, and executives whose careers had developed while his own chart presence was fading. Wariner's recording gave him enough confidence to enter those rooms again. New collaborations followed. Bill did not try to reproduce the Nashville of the 1960s. He brought his command of plain language into partnership with writers and performers from another generation. Songs such as Whiskey Lullaby and Give It Away later proved that his craft had survived the decade when the industry called less often. His return required more than an old song. It required humility, the willingness to listen, collaborate, and learn from people young enough to have discovered songwriting through records bearing his name. After years of uncertainty, Nashville began calling again. Then, in 2003, Bill's name entered the news for reasons unrelated to music. The newspaper carried Bill Anderson's name, but no song title appeared beneath it. In late March 2003, Deborah Marlin made an allegation following a dispute at Bill's Old Hickory home. Bill was taken into custody and released the same day. The first reports placed the accusation beside the public image of Whisperin Bill, the measured Opry performer whose voice had long suggested calm and restraint. For audiences familiar only with the man on stage, the language of the report stood far outside the music associated with his name. The initial account circulated quickly. Determining what the legal record established required more time. In early April, a judge dismissed the requested protective order, while allowing the remaining charge to proceed. By June, the court had approved an arrangement under which that charge was eligible for dismissal after 1 year, provided Bill encountered no further legal trouble. Those proceedings established a limited sequence of facts. An allegation was made. Bill was released the day he was taken into custody. The requested protective order was denied, and the remaining charge entered a conditional path toward dismissal. They did not establish every detail of the dispute or preserve the complete private history between the two people involved. Bill's reputation was not evidence that the allegation was false. The allegation itself was not the same as a proven legal conclusion. Any responsible account of the episode had to hold both distinctions at once. Bill continued writing, performing, and fulfilling his commitments at the Grand Ole Opry. In a song, he was accustomed to revising a line until it expressed exactly what he intended. A public accusation allowed him far less control over how his name would be understood. The episode became part of his documented history without offering the clean emotional resolution of a final verse. His career moved forward, but the record required careful language whenever the incident was recalled. 7 years later, Bill entered a room where reputation, headlines, and legal distinctions carried little importance. Bette, the woman who had known him before the Grand Ole Opry became the center of his professional life, was living with cancer at a live hospice. The room at a live hospice held none of the machinery of Bill Anderson's public life. On the Sunday afternoon before Memorial Day in 2010, there was no stage manager watching the clock, no producer asking for another take, and no audience waiting for the first note. Bette Anderson was 69 and living with cancer. More than 40 years had passed since her marriage to Bill ended, yet Terry and Jenny still joined their lives across that distance. Bill came to see Bette that afternoon. She was tired, though she could still think clearly and carry on a conversation. The words they exchanged remained inside the room. They had once been a young husband and wife facing an uncertain future. Now they were two older people, connected by daughters, grandchildren, and the long memory of who they had been before Nashville asked so much of Bill's time. Early the following morning, Bette passed away peacefully, with Terry and Jenny beside her. Bill was elsewhere when the final moment came. He wrote instead about the daughters who remained near their mother, women he still called my girls. He directed condolences toward an online guest book and asked people to leave their messages for Terry and Jenny there, admitting that he could not carry every expression of sympathy to them himself. The man who had delivered words to millions had reached the limit of what one person could hold. Bill remembered Bette as a devoted mother, a generous stepmother to Jamie, and a trusted friend whose place in his life had survived the end of their marriage. An old family photograph could still preserve the four of them together. The hospice room grew quiet. Their life as husband and wife had ended long before. Their shared history reached its final page only when one of them could no longer answer. By then, another relationship had returned from a much earlier season of Bill's life. He had first met Vicki Salas when she was 19 and married to a guitarist in his band. Their lives moved apart after that marriage ended. Vicki returned to Michigan, later lived in Washington, D.C., married again, and spent 17 years there. She and Bill lost contact. After her later marriage ended, Vicki moved back to Tennessee to be near her two sons. On the day she arrived, Bill's photograph appeared on the front page of a local morning newspaper. The image of a famous man reached a woman who remembered the person behind it. She contacted him to ask how he and Becky were doing, unaware that they had separated years earlier. Bill and Vicki talked, then arranged to meet at a nearby Mexican restaurant. Two people who had last known each other in youth sat across a table after marriages, children, distance, and decades had changed the shape of their lives. Their bond grew without a marriage license or a shared address. Nearly 12 years later, Bill described that time as very short and very wonderful. Vicki had become, in his words, my everything. In 2016, Cancer entered their life together. Vicky underwent chemotherapy and radiation. Her long blonde hair fell away, later returning short, white, and curly. For a time, treatment appeared to be working. She returned to her job as the head tailor at a leading men's store in Nashville. At her work table, fabric could be measured, seams opened, sleeves shortened, and garments adjusted until they fit the person who would wear them. A tailor's day is built from small corrections: a cuff lifted, a seam eased, a jacket returned to its owner fitting better than before. That order gave Vicky a place to stand, while treatment had made so much of life uncertain. Her own body followed a course neither skill nor patience could control. Bill responded with the tool he knew best. He wrote, "Until the light comes on again," promising through the song to walk beside her through the darkness. The recording was spare, built around acoustic guitar, upright bass, and his voice. It felt less like a production than a private message placed gently within reach. For a while, daily life resumed its recognizable shape. Vicky went back to work. Morning had somewhere to begin, and evening could still carry plans for another week. Then the cancer returned with tumors on her liver and lung. Bill and Vicky moved through further chemotherapy, experimental medicine, and other approaches, each one narrowing hope to the size of another appointment. On New Year's Eve, Bill drove Vicky to the hospital for what they expected to be a routine treatment. The room carried the cold brightness of medicine. Beyond its walls, clocks were moving toward midnight and a new year. Inside, the doctor told them Vicky had become too weak to withstand further effects from the drugs. Surgery was also ruled out. 4 days later, hospice care began. A future they had quietly assumed was now measured in days. Vicky was 15 years younger than Bill. He had pictured age arriving in the opposite order. He had seen himself becoming the fragile one, with Vicky beside his bed, feeding him soup and ice cream when his hands were no longer steady enough. The bowl and spoon were ordinary pieces of an imagined old age, so modest that the scene must once have seemed almost certain. Instead, the roles reversed. Bill became the person at the bedside. The food was prepared for her. The chair belonged to him. The private future he expected disappeared, while the room remained exactly where it was. Vicky passed away sometime between 1 and 3 in the morning, on January 16, 2019. Bill wrote that he intended to ask God to explain it, because, at that moment, I just don't understand. A songwriter who had spent 6 decades finding endings for other people's sorrow had reached a sentence with no resolution. The Opry microphone still waited. Letters from listeners still arrived. Unfinished songs remained on the page. Bill returned to them carrying a future that had ended before he did. A blank page waited without asking Bill Anderson to explain where he had been. Work resumed through habits established over a lifetime. A co-writer waiting at a table, a line adjusted until it sounded natural, a letter from a listener answered, an Opry appearance honored because his name was already on the schedule. There was no grand declaration of beginning again. Bill had never fully stopped. He continued by returning to the desk and allowing the day to require a task from him. The absence in his private life remained beyond the edge of the paper. Music gave his hands somewhere to go. In 2020, Bill released the hits reimagined, returning to songs drawn from roughly 60 years of work. The recordings placed an older voice inside material first carried by a younger man. Breath, phrasing, and time had changed the sound. The words remained recognizable. Singing them again did not restore the years in which they had been written. It allowed the distance between then and now to become audible. A familiar lyric could feel like an old room revisited after the furniture had been moved. In December 2021, the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum opened Bill Anderson, As Far As I Can See. Photographs, instruments, manuscripts, keepsakes, a baseball glove, guitars, rhinestone suits, and handwritten lyrics were placed behind glass. Bill walked among objects that had once belonged to ordinary working days. The glass created a strange distance. Objects once handled without ceremony now required labels and careful lighting. Bill could recognize each one immediately, yet the museum visitor beside him would know it only through a date, a caption, and the story attached to it. A suit that had absorbed stage heat stood motionless under museum lighting. A page once covered by his moving hand had become an artifact. The boy who had imagined professional baseball could now see his glove displayed inside the Country Music Hall of Fame. Looking at the exhibition, Bill said, "I'm not sure I could have ever seen this far." The cases preserved the visible evidence of a career. The private hours that gave the career its human cost remained with the man walking past them. Bill released the 6-song EP Forevermore in 2024 and continued writing with Steve Dorff and other collaborators from younger generations. The last one, I'll Forget, co-written with Dorff, approached enduring love through age, memory, vision, and hearing. Bill described it as an attempt to capture the feeling of holding one person close while time changes nearly everything else. In the studio, the title appeared on a screen, a microphone waited, and another performance entered the catalog. The work continued, without claiming that grief had disappeared. It continued because a song still needed to be finished, because younger writers still brought ideas into the room, and because the wooden circle at the Opry still had a place for him. By 2025, discipline could still carry Bill to the desk and the stage. His body began to remind him that keeping a promise now depended on more than willingness. The distance between Bill Anderson and the floor was only the height of a bed. In August 2025, while trying to climb into it, he twisted or tore a muscle or ligament behind his left leg and fell, temporarily unable to walk. The injury happened at home, during a movement too ordinary to appear dangerous. Ice packs and pain medication replaced the plans ahead. Bill canceled a songwriting appointment with T. Graham Brown, a Grand Ole Opry appearance, and a WSM event at the State Fair. In his public message, he reassured listeners that he was improving, but his greatest frustration was having broken commitments he had already made. For decades, Bill had built his professional life around arriving when he promised to arrive. Missing 3 engagements troubled him, even at 87, though the reason began with a fall no audience witnessed. Within days, he reported feeling better. The incident passed without becoming another lasting crisis, but it revealed how much more physical effort an old promise could now require. On July 18, 2026, the Grand Ole Opry celebrated Bill's 65th anniversary as a member. He had joined the cast on July 15, 1961, and became the first artist in the Opry's 100-year history to reach 65 years of membership. Video messages came from Dolly Parton, Garth Brooks, Brad Paisley, Carly Pearce, Steve Wariner, and others whose careers stretched across different generations of country music. Bill's longtime friend and fellow Opry member Lori Morgan presented him with a ring set with a European-cut diamond and blue sapphire. Beneath the stage lights, its blue surface recalled the distant traffic signals a 19-year-old Bill had once watched from a hotel roof in Commerce, Georgia. Those small lights had inspired him to imagine a world beyond the town below. Nearly 7 decades later, that larger world was honoring him from inside the institution that had become his musical home. After the show, relatives, friends, and fellow performers gathered for a reception in Studio A. Away from the ceremony, Bill's 3 children and 8 grandchildren occupied the place he valued most. He had long described them as the lights of his life. His home near Old Hickory Lake remained filled with reading, sports, family, and the work that had continued long after most careers would have slowed. Another honor was also approaching. Bill had been selected to receive the ACM Icon Award at the 19th ACM Honors later that year. The announcement recognized a career that had reached across songwriting, recording, television, radio, literature, and generations of country artists. Bill accepted the Opry tribute from inside the wooden circle, his older hand resting near the microphone. That hand had once pressed sore fingertips against the strings of a difficult guitar. It had written songs that traveled farther than the young man on the Commerce rooftop had known how to imagine. At 19, Bill looked toward a few distant lights and wondered what might exist beyond them. At 88, the world beyond those lights had given him nearly every honor a songwriter could receive. It had also taken people no award could replace. His children and grandchildren were near. New artists continued singing his words. The Opry circle continued to welcome him home. Yet applause could not restore Bet, reverse the injury that changed Becky's life, or return Vicky to the future Bill had expected them to share. After the final note faded, the deepest measure of the evening was not how long the audience applauded, but the names he wished he could call and the voices that could no longer answer. If Bill Anderson's music ever carried you through love, loss, or a goodbye of your own, leave the name of that song below. As long as someone remembers the music, part of the story is carried home.